Ever since his introduction to the series, Ryomen Sukuna has undoubtedly posed a threat to many, but as of recent chapters in the manga, his position among the strongest sorcerers the series has ever seen has only been solidified. But on the other side of the Jujutsu world, with the recent chapters of the Culling games, the strength of some of the strongest sorcerers, whose power has been kept in the dark for a really long time, has finally been on full display, specifically those with the title of Special Grade. Special Grade being the classification that's handed out from the Jujutsu Society for those at the highest rank of power. It begs the question of who can actually take down these absolute monsters, or maybe even all of them at once. In this video, I'll be going over each Special Grade fighter to see how they fare against somebody as powerful as Ryomen Sukuna, and the characters listed here are not in any particular order. Of course, Satoru Gojo won't be mentioned on this list, as there's a multitude of videos already out on YouTube about this same exact topic, and the fight seems to be shaping up in the manga to happen in the near future, so we might as well wait till then. If you enjoyed Jujutsu Kaisen content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below. But when thinking about characters who might be able to take on the King of Curses, the first characters that I think about are get started with Oro. While Oro doesn't possess the official classification as Special Grade, the feats that she displayed in Sendai Colony more than qualify her to be on this list. Even if you think her scaling to base Yuta doesn't matter because he's only in base, she's able to take a beating from both Yuta and Rika, and what's special about this, Yuta also has some sort of curse tool around his arm. She's able to keep up and react to Yuta physically, and later she's able to break that same curse tool using Thin Icebreaker. Oro's curse technique is sky manipulation, and it treats the sky as a surface. She doesn't need to hit her opponent directly at all, and instead all she needs to do is hit the surface of the sky and break that surface like thin ice. This is what gives birth to her technique, Thin Icebreaker. Aside from Thin Icebreaker, she can use her curse technique to contort the sky and change the shape to her advantage. She's able to curve the sky to deflect attacks ranging anywhere from Yuta's punch to Ryu's Granite Blast. And with her also having her own domain expansion, Oro is definitely one of the strongest sorcerers the series has ever seen. But to put it very simply, she's not beating somebody like Sukuna. Sukuna is able to damage somebody like Ryu, who's able to damage Rika, who's able to damage Oro. And because of Newton's third law, we know that characters would end up damaging themselves if they couldn't take the reactionary force that their attacks generate. For example, if I punch and break through a wall, my hand has to have the durability to take the force that's being exerted to break that wall. Meaning because Oro doesn't have the durability to take a punch from somebody like Rika without sustaining damage, she likely can't take the punch from somebody like Ryu, who can't take the attacks of somebody like Sukuna. Meaning Sukuna's curse technique, just like Ryu, would absolutely slice and cut down Oro. And for speed, we know that Sukuna can blitz Ryu, who's able to contend with Yuta, who's able to contend with Oro. Of course, this argument kind of relies on the idea that Ryu wasn't nerfed against Sukuna, which we'll discuss at Ryu's portion of the video. But even if we gave Oro the speed to be able to counteract this mantle, she won't know when it's coming. We see that during Maharaga's fight with Sukuna, Maharaga actually had to adapt to cleave in order to deflect the attack. Sukuna even goes as far to say that after the wheel on Maharaga's head turned, allowing him to adapt to Sukuna's attacks, he was then able to recognize his slashing attacks and deflect them accordingly. This implies that before Maharaga adapted, he didn't actually have the ability to recognize when the attacks were incoming. Because we've never seen Oro's domain, it's kind of hard to say that she'd be able to compete with Sukuna in a domain clash. The only thing that we know for sure about Oro's domain is that it has a barrier, as we see during the attempted clash between her, Ryu, and Yuta. In chapter 206, Tengen makes it apparent that having a domain without a closed barrier is an amazing feat that we don't know if Oro has anything on the level to compete with. Because the only thing that we know for sure is that Oro's domain has a barrier, it means that most likely Sukuna's domain is more refined, therefore he'd win in a domain clash. We also know that this version of Sukuna can't use his curse technique to its fullest extent, meaning that it's impossible to say for sure that the attacks that cut Ryu, which will also damage Oro, are the same strength that cut through people like Jogo or Maharaga in Shibuya, meaning that this Sukuna, whose curse technique is nerfed to some degree, can still easily cut through Oro. Even if you don't agree with the idea that Ryu wasn't nerfed against Sukuna, we saw Oro's reaction to somebody like Sukuna walking around, literally crawling up into a ball and shaking in fear. While Oro definitely earns the title as Special Grade, she'll sadly lose to somebody like Sukuna. With Oro being the first person that we've looked at on this list, it's only fitting that our second is Ryu Ishigori. Just like Oro, if you don't think that Ryu's feats against the base Yuta are that impressive because of course Yuta's only in base, it doesn't really matter to the overall discussion because Ryu has a multitude of instances where he does extremely well against a Yuta who's fully connected with Rika and even against Rika alone. Ryu's able to take a punch from Rika straight to the face and even regain his footing before a second punch is landed, and lands a punch on Rika that's so hard that she becomes staggered for a moment and is thrown into a neighboring building. What's extremely impressive about this is that it's stated that Rika is actually more durable than Yuta himself. This also means that because Ryu can damage Rika, he should also be able to damage Yuta. However, the most impressive thing about Ryu isn't even actually his physical attacks or how tanky he is, it's his curse technique. Ryu has the ability to output just straight cursed energy from the hair on his head like a cannon. This concept is what gives birth to his main technique, Granite Blast. But what makes Ryu so special isn't even just his curse technique, it's the fact that he has the highest amount of cursed energy output out of everybody in the Culling games. Meaning if Ryu ever got the opportunity to fully charge up his Granite Blast and entered into a clash with any other player in the Culling games, he would end up overpowering them and winning the clash. We see this best displayed during Yuta's clash with Ryu. It's even even stated that at full power, Yuta's fully combined blast made with Rika isn't enough to overpower Ryu's fully powered granite blast, so Yuta would have to preemptively fire his blast, forcing Ishigori to fire as well before his blast could reach maximum power and overtake Yuta's. However, Yuta decides that he wants to play along, and when the two finally fire, just as predicted, Ryu ends up overtaking Yuta and sends him flying into a wall. However, the main argument for Ryu not being able to beat Sukuna is the fact that Ryu died almost immediately when trying to challenge him. The argument for him being nerfed is really just predicated off of him being really scared of Sukuna, meaning he might be lacking in certain areas that require decent cursed energy manipulation like reinforcement. However, there's really just two arguments that people make to debunk this point. The first is that sorcerers are trained to control themselves when they're brought on with a lot of emotion. They're even trained to control their emotion and turn it into cursed energy, meaning a sorcerer like Ryu should be more than capable of controlling his emotions in a time like this. The second argument that I hear people make is that Ryu is the one who initiated contact with Sukuna. If Ryu was really scared, then why would he go up to Sukuna and sit right in front of his face? However, this is just a really bad argument because anybody that's truly scared isn't really expected to be acting rational. But because of the simple fact that I mentioned earlier that sorcerers are trained to control their emotions in times like this, and when we take into account the time period that Ryu is from is a time period that was filled with constant fighting and specifically fighting to the death, I don't think that the feeling of fear is something that he shouldn't be used to. Perhaps maybe this just is a special case being that it is Sukuna and all, but it's highly unlikely that Ryu can't control his emotions because of what I mentioned earlier. Just like Oro, because we don't see his domain, we don't know how refined it is in comparison to Sukuna, so we can't even say that he'd beat him in a domain clash. While Ryu also deserves the rank special grade, he definitely isn't strong enough to beat somebody like Sukuna. The next special grade I'm going to go over on this list is Suguru Geto. The best time to really gauge Geto's strength, and the only time we really see him display any feats as a special grade, is during JJK Volume 0. Physically, Geto should be on the same caliber of somebody like Yuta from this time in Rika, being that he's able to keep up with them in combat by using Playful Cloud. Aside from speed, Geto is also extremely durable. He's able to come back from being hit with Inumaki's cursed speech in seconds like it's nothing, and his endurance is so high that in the JJK Volume 0 movie, he's able to get back up from a black flash landed by Yuta and continue to fight. But the reason why Geto is just so powerful is because of his curse technique, Cursed Spirit Manipulation. Kinjaku explains to Choso later on in the story that what defines a special grade is the ability to take down nations, and by using his curse technique, Cursed Spirit Manipulation, it makes Geto qualified to become a special grade. However, Geto doesn't really have any feats to put him on the level of somebody like Sukuna. At best, we can say that Geto can contend with people like Yuta and Rika, however, we don't know how much stronger Yuta and Rika are in the main story in comparison to how they are here. We don't know if Geto has a domain expansion, so even if it came down to a battle of domains, we don't even know if Geto would be able to compete. But even if you don't agree with anything I've said so far, when we take into account somebody like Kinjaku literally has Geto's body, his curse technique, his knowledge, and on top of that, he has a multitude of his own curse techniques, likely more experience being that he's been around for 1,000 years, and with all that, Kinjaku still admits inferiority to somebody like Sukuna. In other words, if Kinjaku is just a better version of Geto, and Kinjaku himself admits inferiority to Sukuna, then it's a no-brainer that Geto would probably be done the same way Kinjaku would, or maybe even worse. With Geto being the first person we mentioned on this list who's actually classified as a special grade, he obviously deserves the title, but he also just simply can't compare to somebody like Sukuna. The next special grade to go over on this list is Yuki Tsukuma. While saying Yuki's time on screen was extremely limited, the showings that she does have when she appears are nothing but impressive. However, at best, she scales to somebody like Kinjaku, who as we mentioned earlier just admits inferiority to somebody like Sukuna. We can't really make a domain argument for Yuki, as we've never seen her domain, so we can't gauge if it's on the level of somebody like Sukuna, but the best bet for Yuki winning this fight is undoubtedly her black hole. This attack is stated to be so strong that if Tengen's barrier and Yuki's will didn't suppress the attack, it could have destroyed the entire planet. But when taking into account that she'd likely have to grab Sukuna in order to pull this off, it makes it extremely unlikely considering that Sukuna is one of the fastest people in the verse. Like I mentioned earlier, Yuki would just get cut down by attacks that she can't see and can't counter. And when it comes down to if Yuki would do something like this in character, we don't really know if she would if she wasn't fighting in Tengen's barrier, a place where the destructive capacity of the black hole can be contained, because I really don't think Yuki would destroy the entire planet just to kill somebody like Sukuna. There's the argument to be made that Yuki might last a little bit longer than others, considering that she has reverse curse technique and her endurance is so high that she's able to perform the black hole feat after being hit by a mini Uzumaki straight to the stomach and half of her body literally being cut down by Kinjaku. I think something like Yuki's black hole is more than capable of taking down Sukuna, however saying that she'd be able to pull it off is kind of a stretch. While Yuki also clearly deserves the title of special grade, she also just isn't strong enough to compete with somebody like Sukuna. The next character on this list is going to be Kashimo. Kashimo being somebody who can contend with people like Akari, and Akari being somebody who's arguably stronger than somebody like Yuta, who's officially classified as a special grade, means that Kashimo is more than qualified to be on this list. But what really makes this fight so interesting is that it's probably going to happen in the next few chapters. We know that during Kashimo's fight with Akari and during his fight with Panda, Kashimo never actually used his curse technique and instead was only optimizing his cursed energy trait. We know that Kashimo saving his curse technique to fight Sukuna, but because we don't know how strong this curse technique really really makes Kashimo, the only thing that we can really say for sure is that it's above the rest of his techniques, but saying it's to the extent where he can fight somebody like Sukuna might be kind of a stretch. The first thing to really think about when talking about Kashimo versus Sukuna is that because Kashimo is around Akari level and Akari is around Yuta level and Yuta is around Ryu's level, it means that if Sukuna can blitz Ryu, he should be able to do the same to everybody else in that tier. The only thing that we can say for sure that might save Kashimo is his lightning strike. Because Kashimo's cursed energy is just like lightning, he can separate the positive and negative charges, and when he punches his opponent, he can transfer the positive charge to his enemies when he attacks. When stopping the negative charges accumulated in his body from discharging to the ground, using this to guide said charge towards his, meaning he can create a bolt of lightning to rip through all of his opponents, and it's a can't miss attack without the use of domain expansion. But the reason why the lightning might give Kashimo a chance is because it's stated that Kashimo can use the return stroke of lightning accumulated in his staff to land attacks directly on his opponents. We even see this happen to Akari where he gets his side completely blown off. What makes the return stroke of lightning so important is that it can move at 1/3 the speed of light, and when taking into account the version of Sukuna that had fought Maki, Maki was able to keep up and land attacks on Sukuna. In this version of Maki needed some form of precognition by sensing the air temperature and density to react to Naoya's movements, who's only moving at Mach 3, and when you compare the gap between being 1/3 the speed of light and being Mach 3, the difference is huge. This means that Sukuna would need to react 97,000 times faster than cursed Naoya can move at max speed in order to react to Kashimo's lightning. But the obvious problem here for Kashimo is that while his attack can move extremely fast and likely cut straight through Sukuna, there's absolutely nothing to say that Kashimo would scale to his own attack. If Kashimo manages to pull this off and activate the attack, of course it'll be strong enough and fast enough to rip straight through Sukuna, but the level of speed and the level of strength required to pull this attack off is just a caliber that we don't know if Kashimo can perform on. Maybe his curse technique will be enough to beat Sukuna, but as of now we don't have a single clue of what it is, and even going as far to say it's lightning based might just be a stretch. We know other characters that have cursed energy traits like Akari for example. His cursed energy is shown to be rigid, and it's stated that being hit by Akari is similar to being hit with a serrated bat. It feels rough like sandpaper. This obviously doesn't relate to Akari's curse technique at all, so saying that because Kashimo's cursed energy trait is lightning based, it would mean that his curse technique is also lightning based, so it would be exactly like what we see on screen, just a little bit better. It isn't really consistent with other cursed energy traits that we see on screen. I don't think the battle would need to come down to a domain expansion, but if it did, we don't know if Kashimo has a domain, and Hollow Wicker Basket wouldn't be effective against Sukuna's domain as he has an empty barrier, and we know that Hollow Wicker Basket works by attacking the barriers to negate the guaranteed hit effect of domain expansions. Even if you want to say that Kashimo's a little bit faster than Akari, so he should be a little bit faster than everybody else, and maybe it's even to the extent where he doesn't get blitzed by Sukuna, if Sukuna uses something like Maharaga, Kashimo has absolutely no way to defeat this monster. Kashimo's lightning doesn't seem like it has the destructive capacity capable of one-shotting Maharaga, and if he starts out with landing normal punches on Maharaga, he might just adapt to Kashimo's entire cursed energy trait at once. Overall, just to clarify one more time, Kashimo definitely does deserve the title of special grade, but again, just like everybody else we've mentioned so far, he doesn't stand a chance against somebody like Sukuna. The next character and my favorite character on this list is Kinji Akari. While the showings of base Akari are extremely limited and his base form isn't really that impressive, what makes Akari truly a special grade level character is when he's on a roll or in Jackpot. It's stated twice that when Akari's in Jackpot, he even becomes stronger than Yuta Kotsu. However, because this video isn't really a Yuta vs Akari video and it's a very contentious topic, we'll say that for simplicity that they're around the same level. Even if Akari is a little bit slower and a little bit weaker than Sukuna, when he's in Jackpot mode, he's gonna become nearly unkillable. What Sukuna would do and can do against Akari in Jackpot mode, we'll discuss later, but for now let's discuss if Akari would even be able to enter Jackpot mode when fighting Sukuna. There's the argument to be made that the second Akari would open up his domain to roll for Jackpot, it would force Sukuna to open up his own counter domain to defend himself, and it would lead to Akari getting absolutely decimated and shred to pieces. But I actually believe that there's a strong possibility that the second Akari would open up his domain, Sukuna wouldn't find a reason to need to defend himself. Unlike many believe, Akari's domain actually does have a sure hit. The only thing is that his sure hit isn't like any other that we've ever seen. Akari trades the lethality of his sure hit for activation speed. So while Akari's sure hit isn't really lethal and can't do any damage, it does activate extremely fast. While many may be confused on what exactly I'm referring to in Akari's domain, it's the information dump that hits Charles and Kashimo. If Sukuna is hit with all the information about Akari's domain, he'll probably realize that it's not lethal and he won't have a reason to expand his own. We see Sukuna do a similar thing against Yorozu, to when even when Yorozu had a sure hit that would completely eviscerate Sukuna, because Sukuna had planned to use Maharaga, he didn't feel a need to expand Malevolent Shrine. We even see a similar thing happen to Kashimo inside Akari's domain, where it's stated that the info dump was able able to hit Kashimo so fast and tell him all the information about the game, faster than he can even give up on using Hollow Wicker Basket, much less activate it. So because of all this, I think Akari would end up opening up his domain against Sukuna, and Sukuna probably won't retaliate by opening up his own. I also don't think it's out of character for Sukuna to maybe want to play along in Akari's game. He begins messing around against Jogo and Shibuya, and against Megami, he purposely tries to get Megami to go all out and waits for him to begin summoning Maharaga. I don't think it's out of character for Sukuna to hold back and let Akari play his game. And when it comes down to Akari actually being able to land a jackpot, we know that currently when Akari enters his next domain, he's gonna be in increased probability mode. Kashima was so sure that the next time Akari would open up domain expansion that he would land jackpot that he literally blew off Akari's arm and drained the rest of his cursed energy. I think there's a pretty reasonable chance that Akari would end up opening up his domain and Sukuna would let him and even play along with his game, and Akari would enter jackpot mode for another 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Whenever Akari enters jackpot mode, he gets some of the best abilities that we've ever seen in the entire series. He gets an infinite amount of cursed energy that constantly circulates through his body. The high volume of cursed energy causes Akari's body to reflexively perform reverse curse technique to constantly keep his body together and not break apart. Akari's regeneration with reverse curse technique is also so amazing that he's able to regrow anything from chunks of his body to entire limbs. And with Akari also being able to heal while completely unconscious, it means that Sukuna really only has two options. He's either going to have to wait out the 4 minutes and 11 seconds, or Sukuna's going to have to find a way to negate the reverse curse technique. The first way that really comes to mind is obviously being able to destroy Akari's head in one blow. Because the way that you're supposed to heal with reverse curse technique is by directing the cursed energy from your head to the parts of the body that you want to heal, destroying the source of where the power is being directed from should completely stop the reverse curse technique. But because we know that Akari in particular can heal while he breaks using reverse curse technique, it means that if Sukuna cuts straight through his head, Akari might be able to heal mid-slice. A simpler way to put it would be saying that if you're trying to cut through a piece of paper and the end that you just cut is constantly being reshaped and reformed back to normal, even though you will continuously cut the paper with scissors and continue to slice through, if the end that you just cut is constantly being fixed, then the piece of paper will never turn into two sheets and it will stay as one. But even if you don't think Sukuna's slices will be enough to cut down Akari like he does to Ryu, we know that for example things like the fire arrow that Sukuna uses in Shibuya has more than the required destructive capacity to easily destroy and decimate Akari's entire body, much less his head. But even if you don't think Sukuna's fire arrow is enough, if it comes down to a point where he needs to use domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine being able to level a city more than qualifies it to be able to cut down Akari. But even if you want to say that none of that really matters in comparison to Akari because he's just that strong, when he summons Maharaga, it really is just game over. There isn't one move in Akari's arsenal that we know of that's on the caliber to be able to one-shot Maharaga to stop his adaptation. It's even debatable that if Maharaga adapted to punches and kicks when he was fighting Sukuna, but that's a topic for another day. Of course, Akari deserves the title of special grade, but in a fight with Sukuna, Sukuna simply just has too many win conditions to get around Akari's jackpot. Even if you disagree with Malevolent Shrine beating Akari, or the Fire Arrow, or even Maharaga, Sukuna can just simply wait out the 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and then he'll continue to beat up Akari once he's back in base. The next character on this list is Yuta Okkotsu. Aside from Satoru Gojo, of course, the sorcerer that's been put up the most against Ryomen Sukuna has been Yuta Okkotsu, and this topic has been debated throughout the space for years now, ever since Yuji decided to give his input. Yuji explains that he believes that Yuta is the person who can actually take down Sukuna if he incarnates back inside of his body. And when we take into account what Yuji knows about Sukuna, he was able to see everything Sukuna had done in Shibuya, which included both of his curse techniques and his own domain expansion. But there's still a few more problems with this statement. For one, Yuji has to be giving some sort of estimation for Yuta's power, and he can't be judging off of anything he's seen. We know that Yuji is able to keep up with Sukuna, and if Yuji was judging Yuta's power based on the ability to keep up with himself, it would basically imply that Yuji can keep up with Yuta, who can beat up Sukuna, which doesn't really make much sense when taking into account that Sukuna incarnating inside of Yuji is literally just Yuji's body, with Sukuna's high level of cursed energy manipulation and his own curse techniques. Because we know Yuta is comparable to somebody like Ryu, who Sukuna is easily able to blitz and take down, it means that Yuta scaling to a 15-finger Sukuna doesn't even make much sense in general, meaning that the statement given by Yuji is likely an overestimation of Yuta's power, and was judged by things like cursed energy volume, or maybe the lore about Yuta Okkotsu being a special grade who was trained by Gojo, but not anything like strength and speed. Even if Yuta began using reverse curse technique to heal from the injuries he'd sustained from Sukuna's attacks, we know that reverse curse technique still drains a lot of cursed energy from Yuta, as during his fight with Ryu and Oro, he didn't begin to really bottom out until he started healing from his injuries. But if Yuta started out linked with Rika, it would fix his issue with his cursed energy drainage from reverse curse technique. But as we saw during Ryu's fight with Yuta, Ryu was able to punch Rika so hard that he actually forcibly ended the connection early between Yuta and Rika before the 5 minutes were up. We know that Sukuna should have the speed and power to be able to pull this off, and he'll just basically do the same thing he he did against Ryu and end the connection before the 5 minutes are actually up. If the battle came down to 2 domain expansions, the main issue for Yuta is that we've never seen his domain, so we can't say for sure that it'd be enough to contend with somebody like Sukuna. The only thing that we know for sure about Yuta's domain is that it has a barrier. From what we know about domains with barriers in comparison to ones that have empty barriers, having an empty barrier is an impressive feat that only people like Kenjaku and Sukuna have been able to pull off. So based on what we know and what we don't know, we can't say for sure, and that it's probably unlikely that Yuta has anything that can compete with Sukuna's domain. But even if Sukuna was pushed enough to summon Maharaga's sword that's constantly being fueled with positive energy should be more than enough to cut down Rika. There's also the possibility that Sukuna might be able to deal with Rika a lot easier than some might think. Because of how proficient he is with reverse curse technique, even going as far as being able to regrow whole limbs by accident, it might not be too far-fetched to say that he can output positive energy similar to It doesn't seem too far-fetched to say that he might be able to output positive energy similar to how Yuta did to Kururushi. This would result in completely destroying Rika and ending the connection for sure. But even if you wanted to say that everybody on this list would be at around 15 finger Sukuna level, the same Sukuna that beat up Ryu, it doesn't really change anything because now in the manga as of chapter 222, Sukuna is at about 20 fingers worth of his original power, meaning he should be way stronger now compared to any Sukuna that we've ever seen. But even if before he got this much stronger, nobody could already compete with him, it really just solidifies the idea that no one could really compete with Sukuna other than Satoru Gojo, which we'll see next week. If you enjoyed Jujutsu Kaisen content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below.